And today we are going to have an interesting discussion on a topic which has seen some developments already also during the summer, because as you know, during the summer, we had the publication of the hydrogen and the carbonized gas market package. So what we want to discuss today is actually a quite clear question: which hydrogen network will we see developing for Europe? And we were joking 2 minutes before starting with Alberto, we don't have the ambition to, of course, have finished this debate after 1.5 hours with a clear overview, but we hope that this debate today will help updating each other on the latest developments, and we will hear from many experts today. Just some practical details. This doesn't change from last year. You are very welcome to interact with our speakers. So please, as soon as we start, don't hesitate writing your questions in the Q&A box that you see just underneath our speaking heads. And we will have also time for polls. We will hear from you also via this instrument. But enough from me. I will now give the floor to Alberto for an introduction to today's topic. Enjoy the debate.
Thank you very much, Ilaria, and good afternoon from my side as well. Yes, I will try to be very brief. Just to put today's debate into context, we all know that hydrogen, low carbon and renewable hydrogen is seen as one of the pillars of the decarbonization strategy, especially for those sectors which are hard to abate or hard to electrify. The European Union, the European Commission has set a strategy with some ambitious or some targets for 2024 and then for 2030 of reaching 10 million tons of renewable hydrogen produced in the EU, and then with the REPowerEU, another 10 million tons were added of importing renewable hydrogen. And beyond 2030, I think the idea is that hydrogen would play a major role, renewable hydrogen would play an even larger role in terms of decarbonizing those sectors which are hard to abate otherwise. Now, in terms of the market and the supporting network, I think there are at the moment two visions which are circulating among stakeholders. One is based on hydrogen valleys, which is basically the model we have at the moment. So local hydrogen clusters where production and consumption of hydrogen happen within a confined regional context. And the other one is based on a European-wide hydrogen market and network. And I think this is a vision that the Commission put forward in the hydrogen strategy. At some stage, they refer to an unhindered cross-border trade and efficient allocation of hydrogen supply among sectors. So it may be that these two visions are a matter of time. So initially, we will have local markets with greater integration later on. A number of infrastructure operators has put forward a concept of a European hydrogen backbone, emphasizing the fact that some of the current gas infrastructure could actually be repurposed to be used for hydrogen. And I think the latest estimate is that by 2030, more than 30,000 kilometers of hydrogen pipelines could be commissioned, as I said, partly from disused gas pipelines. There are also hydrogen projects in the list of projects of common interest. In the latest list in 2023 included around 65 hydrogen electrolyzers projects, of which 17 projects related to hydrogen transport infrastructure. On the other hand, in the first auction of the Hydrogen Bank, all the projects were basically local. And I think the longest pipeline for hydrogen, which was envisaged in those projects, was, I think, 200 kilometers long or something like that. So at the moment, we're looking at local compounds, local regions for hydrogen market. There is an ambition to have a more integrated EU-wide hydrogen market. If we're talking about 2030, it's 5.5 years out. So it's a time where somehow we need to take a view. And basically what is missing at the moment, as Ilaria was saying, is an hydrogen target model. We had an electricity target model which was developed in the mid-2000s and served as a blueprint for developing legislation. We had a gas target model developed in 2011-12. Again, it was used as a reference to identify the areas where additional effort was needed. Maybe we do need a hydrogen target model. And that's basically the debate for today, is to compare notes and see how different stakeholders and the audience, through their questions, see the likely future development of the hydrogen market and network, keeping in mind that the first targets are for 2030, and 2030 is something that is basically yesterday when it comes to developing markets and networks. So I'm really happy that today we have a excellent set of presenters and panelists, and I will start by introducing two opening presentations, one from Lukas Werner from DG Energy, so providing the policy perspective, and the second one from Cilla Bartok from ACER. She's head of Department for Gas, Hydrogen and Retail, and she will provide the regulatory perspective. And then we'll have the industry discussing on the background of these two initial presentations. So as Ilaria mentioned, please, if you have questions for the panelists or the presenters, please put them into the Q&A box, and then we'll try to deal with them later on. But there is also a poll or polls, which will be run after the opening statement of the panelists. So, Lukas, thank you very much for being with us today, and I will give now you the screen and the mic for your opening presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alberto. Thank you, Ilaria. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very happy to be here with you. And I don't really see all of you here, but I'm sure that there are familiar faces in the audience, and some of you know me too. Lukas Werner, I've recently rejoined DG Energy after a year of fellowship in the US, where I actually studied the US hydrogen support framework. And before that, I was working on the first hydrogen PCI PMI list. So I have some involvement in the things that Alberto also mentioned, and I'm very happy to share with you as a start the abundant activities that the Commission has undertaken in the last months and years in the area of hydrogen, together with Member States, Parliament and Council, to put in place a reliable and future-proof framework for hydrogen. And I think to maybe pick up on what Alberto just said, on the hydrogen target model, I think that we shall see that further in discussion. I think one thing is for sure, we have already clarified many aspects of a stable market development, but at the same time, we all are facing significant questions on the future development. We are still looking into how the frameworks will be implemented at different levels, how the price will evolve, when it will become cost competitive, the speed with which projects will ramp up. So I think it's contrary, maybe, Alberto, to the gas and electricity sectors, where target models were developed at the moment when you had decades of experience. I think we are a little bit leaping into some sort of unknown, but I think we are doing what we can to do that in a very reasonable, prudent, and I think also evidence-based way. Now, what I would like to do in the next few minutes is just quickly go through, and many of you know that, the activities that we have undertaken to show that there is already a significant framework that you can build on. And maybe we can switch to the next slide. Now, all of you know that we have an ambitious target to decarbonize the European Union. It will be a challenging activity in many different sectors, including in hard to decarbonize industry and transport sectors, where we think that hydrogen will play a key role after we've exploited the energy efficiency potential and after we've electrified what we can. Now, to achieve that, we have been putting in place, and I'll talk about that in a moment, a framework that we hope will be conducive for targeted infrastructure development. Somebody says he doesn't see the presentation, or she.
No, I think we do see it. At least I see it.
Very good. We have put in place a regulatory framework. We are working on EU and national level planning and prioritization, and we are having a set of funding instruments to ensure this development. And in doing that, I think Alberto already hinted at it. Is that we start with valleys and we move from there to a more trans-European hydrogen network. Next slide, please. This slide just shows you that in the last 4 years, there was actually a host of activities that we have undertaken at the EU level to frame the development of the hydrogen sector, starting from the hydrogen strategy in 2020, and then over some funding possibilities that were put in place for hydrogen, like the Recovery and Resilience Facility, Clean Hydrogen Partnership, many more in the stated area as well. Then also significant legislative activities, notably a revised Renewable Energy Directive that put in place targets for the industry and transport sectors, and increased ambition for hydrogen in the context of the Russian aggression on Ukraine, seeing how hydrogen could actually contribute to a significant or full phase out of fossil fuel dependency, especially from Russia. And then work on fleshing out the regulatory framework, the rules for renewable fuels of non. Activity that's underway is member states implementing this significant framework and operators adapting and investing and developing their projects. And what we'll be hopefully seeing very soon is then, as a last piece of the puzzle, delegated act on the low carbon hydrogen rules. Next slide, please. Ilaria referred in the beginning to hydrogen and decarbonized gases markets package. And that's basically our framework to ensure that we have a framework that's comparable to what we have in the electricity and gas fields, but natural gas fields, but this time before already having a market in place, so that we have equal access to our assets, that we have independence of the hydrogen actors that are operating the assets, that we can address conflicts of interest, but also that we have the necessary flexibility to actually, with all the unknowns that we currently still have, make sure that this framework helps actors in member states actually to develop their infrastructure. And there are quite some exceptions in place until the end of 2032. In parallel, the Commission can also complement that through more technical rules if that will be necessary. Next slide, please. Now, an important element is the coordinated planning of our networks, and that's something that for which we have put in place at European, national, and at distribution level frameworks that ensure that actors talk to each other, that there is long-term visibility on where the direction is going at the different levels. And at the same time, we ensure that hydrogen can develop in a way that also ensures its independence from incumbent sectors, from incumbent players in the field. And that's the rules that were put in place or amended by the package were already built on what we have already for some time in the Trans-European Network.
Lukasz, can you hear us?
I do.
Can you repeat
Yeah.
maybe the last sentence because it breaks
Exactly.
from time to time?
I'm
Thanks.
sorry for that.
Oh, it's not sure.
The last sentence was, next slide, please. And before that, I was referring to the link with Tenny.
Okay, excellent.
EU funding support, as said, I mean, depending on the estimates, we are talking about significant amounts that are available for hydrogen, either directly for hydrogen or technology neutral. And most recently, I think a very interesting achievement that was the conclusion of the first pilot auction using funds from the Innovation Fund to support hydrogen production in the context of the European Hydrogen Bank. And we've seen 7 winners in 4 member states from industry and transport sectors. Alberto, you were referring to the relative proximity of supply and demand for these projects. I think given the requirements that we put on the promoters to basically become operational fast, and we will actually probably ask them to become operational even faster for the next auction, I think that is a normal, that does not say that there won't be more long distance transport evolving, but I think it's true at the moment. That's the picture that we have seen. And I think the figures are significant. I mean, we are talking about something like 1.6 million tons of hydrogen produced over 10 years by the winning bids. Maybe move to the next slide, please. Now, given that that's the area in which I worked before last year, the Trans-European Energy Networks regulation has been an important tool for closing gaps in existing sectors like electricity and natural gas, and has for the first time in 2022, 2023 been our tool to engage in a structured process of identifying European trans-European hydrogen infrastructure priorities. 65 projects indeed were selected in a process in which we involve the TSOs, obviously, the ministries, the regulators, NGOs, and the process builds on the 10-year network development plan, but we complemented also with additional analysis and additional facts and figures. And we can move to the next slide. That's, for example, one outcome of the process. We asked the member states, well, what do you think that in 2030, and 2030 was the focus of this first process, what do you think in 2030 will you actually consume and what will you produce? And this map then allowed us to develop a sort of flow model, an idea of from where to where the flows are actually most likely to flow in the first years of the ramping up of the hydrogen sector in the EU. Next slide, please. And here you see our the result of the process, the 65 projects. It's actually a little bit more pipelines than Alberto, you said. It's 37 pipeline projects. The 17 is, I think, the figure for the electrolyzers. So you see here the light blue lines are really the embryo, if you want, of the future hydrogen infrastructure set for the EU. It is aligned with the priorities that we identified in Repower EU against the vision of Europe being obviously an important hydrogen producer and consumer, but also counting on the fact that renewable hydrogen in particular will become cost competitive with fossil fuel competition, and therefore also we want to ensure openness to international imports as much as we can. And I think it's also interesting to recall this set of infrastructure would be about 20,000 kilometers of pipelines. And we are looking here at, and Abel and colleagues will know this even better, we are looking here at a share of about 50% of projects that are a mix of repurposing and new, 37% are new, and 13 are repurposed. So repurposed plays certainly an important role in that development. And I'm leaving aside here things like, for example, what we have in the transport area with the Alternative Fuels Infrastructure Directive and so on, that has a similar.
I think.
Next slide, please. Sorry. Thank you. Now, I would like to close with a slide that's the outcome of a recent study that we have been undertaking, that consultants have been undertaking for the Commission. And this is if you want us progressing with our understanding of the sector in between different 10E intervals. We have done similar studies for other regions in Europe, for the SESEC region, like in Southeastern Europe. We're working on a similar one in the BEMIP region, so in the north of the European Union. And this study that focuses on the hydrogen potential of the Iberian Peninsula shows how a comprehensive development of the network in the next 5.5 or 15.5 years could look. I mean, the modeling that underpins this took into account expected infrastructure development, expected supply, expected demand in the different locations, and it was quite granular actually. And it will certainly feed into the next PCI PMI process that we are actually just launching. So to sum up and not to take too much of your time, I think the solution will, as we see it, probably be in between valleys and trans-European networks, and there's certainly a very important temporal development that I mean, it's a question of time for this to proceed. The market will and should decide, but it's certainly important during a ramp-up phase that we continue supporting this development, because for the moment, renewable hydrogen is not cost competitive, and it will still stay like that. For sure, decommissioning of the natural gas network will be an important aspect to consider. We will not convert the huge European natural gas network into hydrogen. That's out of the question from our perspective. And if you want to look at indication, I mean, the first PCI PMI list is like 20,000 kilometers. So I think it's probably somewhere in between the more ambitious visions that we might hear today and the very limited valley vision. Thank you. Looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Lukáš. I think an extremely interesting presentation. I think you're right. You know, there is a difference between this sector and the electricity and gas, because here there is substantial uncertainty. The other target model were developed once we knew the sector well. I guess this is why it's even more important that policymakers and regulators stick the neck out, because risk is such that it cannot be all left to commercial operators. Okay, thank you very much, Lukáš. Now, Cilla, the screen and the mic is yours for the regulators' perspectives.
Thank you very much, Alberto, and I'm also welcoming the audience. Good afternoon, and we can also move already to the following slide. And I have a general slide which focuses a bit on the decarbonization and its various components, and whereby we would like to achieve a more system integration. But of course, we are facing numerous challenges that we would need to put into this picture. One is that we would see some demand reduction that would be backed by efficiencies, and also a sort of a change, a reconfiguration of the energy vectors. And you could see some figures that we were trying to extrapolate based on some commission materials like the REPower, but also we were using some other aspects. And of course, the timeframes are long. If you look out to 2050, then we see that the energy demand is anticipated to drop by 40%. But of course, we will see at that point in time, like when we get to the present tense, when we get to 2050, we would then, of course, see what the real numbers were. And of course, we have a challenge which comes from the from electrification. And then we would see an expansion of the renewables, and that is something that would also preoccupy us and also those who are working with this integrated energy system, where we would like to efficiently use the various tools and the various vectors in and make them progress as meaningfully, not to transform necessarily sort of renewables into hydrogen if it's not needed. So eventually try to use the electricity as efficiently as possible. And of course, that leads also to a better approach to demand response approaches, the use of flexibility. And then we get to hydrogen, to deploy hydrogen, and then to deploy low carbon gases, where electrification is not an option. And then here, then we have a nascent sector which looks for a target model, as Alberto says, but eventually this is pretty difficult because we don't see all the perimeters. And on one hand, what Lukáš was saying, we would need to sort of do some sort of support or nurturing, understanding the needs that are coming. And our sort of word of caution here is that that should be incremental, that we should be looking after demand, how the demand is evolving incrementally and showing interest towards hydrogen. And we also have to keep into account that this would happen in a context where the various factors are competing. And then it could be that in certain sectors, we could do electrification where we cannot yet imagine that we can do so. And then that means that we would need to find a good way to integrate the sectors. And I think we are at the beginning of this journey. And then I think throughout, from now to 2050, we would need to discover the journeys. The question is, what is the target model, for which sector we are creating a target model? We create a target model for an integrated system, and how we would do that. These were the generic slides, and I would like to move to the next one, and I would go then very specific, and specific more from the perspective of the hydrogen sector. And then here I would just highlight the elements of the regulatory approach. Lukáš was also talking about it. We have a planning element in the decarbonization package, which foresees, how to plan new infrastructure. And then we have also how like articles and guidance, how to allocate costs of infrastructure towards users. But beyond the cost allocation aspects, I think there is another challenge with that we need to handle, and that is coming, to not only that we have to allocate costs in the context of developing a hydrogen infrastructure, but there are some risk management elements we would need to think of. And that goes on top of this cost allocation aspect. We have two challenges. On one hand, there will be high unit cost in the early phases of infrastructure development, because there are few users who eventually would enter potentially a hydrogen network. And then we also have a challenge about what's happening with the demand. We don't know exactly what is the demand trajectory when it comes that we would be looking into the future today. We don't know how the demand exactly would come forward, and that entails certain risks. There are two elements that I would like to talk today about: the cost allocation aspects and about the risk management aspects, and this would be more or less the focus of my presentation. We can go to the next slide. Okay, so cost allocation. I think we have some experiences with cost allocation. We have a network code on gas tariffs. So eventually, what we wanted to achieve by this sort of network code, that we have proper cost reflectivity when it comes to allocation of the cost. And that means, that network users who are using the network should be paying for the costs of their usage. And that has additional aspects. It allows us to have affordable networks. Eventually, we have users. The users would be paying for what they are using, so they would be interested. This network is affordable. If they don't have a business case, they would not come forward. Then, altogether in such system, that means that we will have more or less good price signals on how big the infrastructure would be, and then that leads also consequently to system efficiency. Now you have a different kind of challenge when you are facing an infrastructure that is nascent. And then if you look into then just purely, how you would be allocating the costs, for this infrastructure, then potentially you could be looking at, you know, certain things. On one hand, you can use tariff methodology for kind of these new networks, and you can say, okay, the domestic POIs could be directly picking up the costs of the built infrastructure. And then in some cases, depending, you know, how you design the case, you can have also financial compensation where you still within the local framework, where you would be transferring some sort of charges from potentially the repurposed gas sector towards the hydrogen sector and users. It's an important element in the legislation is the intertemporal cost allocation. This is another instrument that that intends to manage the high costs in the initial phase of infrastructure build out. And what it does practically tries that allocates costs over time. This is not necessarily exactly what we have in gas. There you have in the present, we are allocating the cost. In the intertemporal cost allocation, this means that today we are paying less with less users, and tomorrow the bigger user pool will pick up the cost of the present or at that point in time in the past, and in that way would help eventually the evolution of this infrastructure. Third element that we have at hand to allocate costs is to agree, to sit down on the two sides of the border and think about, you know, what would be the costs and the benefits of this infrastructure, and potentially distribute the benefits if there is a neighboring country benefiting from the infrastructure more than the one who is building and spending money on the infrastructure, then there is an agreement how eventually the one who benefits more contributes more to the costs. And that allows eventually to split resources between countries. Then you can have financial transfers, and financial transfers allows eventually to transfer costs between sectors. It allows that sectors like gas or potentially indirectly electricity users contribute to the build-up of the hydrogen network, and there are some financial transfers that are established by the regulator as a consequence or with the help of some consultations to understand again somehow the interaction, potentially even benefits that the others would win from this contribution, and find a way, you know, how we do that. And finally, you could have then public financing, and those should follow the state aid rules of the union, but it's possible that the state intervenes and supports, enables the infrastructure where we don't know certain amounts of costs, how those certain amount of costs could be covered because we don't have enough users at the point in time. Next slide, please. So following the cost allocation approaches, there is also an element to risk allocation. And the risk eventually comes that we don't know how certain costs would be fully covered. Here, the challenge is, you know, whether we have sufficient amount of users who can bear this cost. We can impose certain costs on users, but they may not be picking up. I would go a little bit faster on this slide, but it's technical, and I think you know, the elements, you can take a look at it later on, you know, to see, you know, that you can have various sources where you can eventually put some bearing and cost sort of allocation, or you can put costs on those users, but you have somehow to be aware that you have a balanced approach to that. And so here, you can either turn to the network users and then put, you know, these additional risks that relate to the infrastructure because you don't know how the demand would be developing, because you could have maybe facing higher costs while you are building up these new infrastructures. You can turn to the network users and you can do some tariff adjustments. Alternatively, you can also turn to the network users across the borders if you believe that they would be benefiting. Furthermore, and alternatively, you can create some long-term commitments for those users who are willing to become holder or willing to become taking up these commitments because they are certain that they would be using hydrogen. You can also turn to the infrastructure operators saying, please pick up some of the risks and be part of this risk sharing. And finally, again, the state can come in with some state guarantees. So these are the options that are having on the risk management part. And then we can move to the next one. And this shows a bit the process. What is critical here, that we have an understanding, how that we understand the risk, that we know how we allocate them to whom, and then from that on, we create also clarity about the conditions which relate to this risk. We have a methodology, we know how to allocate them, and that remains very important in finding a good way how we would, from a regulatory perspective, finance this piece of infrastructure. Thank you very much. I will stop here and give back the floor to Alberto.
Thank you very much, Sheila. Thanks a lot for providing the challenges from the regulatory perspective. And I think this was very well complementing the presentation of Lukasz. Indeed, we have a nascent network which needs to be paid for, and at the beginning probably won't be used fully. So thanks a lot for sharing your views on cost coverage and risk allocation. I will now pass the screen and the mic to Ilaria to moderate the panel. So Ilaria.
Okay, sure. Thanks very much, Alberto. After these two very interesting and comprehensive interactive presentations, we would like now to hear from some experts that we invited for a panel discussion. And we will start with Maria Sicilia. She is the chairwoman of the European Hydrogen Backbone Initiative. I think we allocated approximately 5 minutes for each presentation. So please feel free to share the slides.
Well, thank you very much for inviting the European Hydrogen Backbone Initiative. I have 10 slides, so I will go very quickly over the presentation. First slide. My first point is that gas TSOs that are members of the EHB initiative are those that are driving the development of the EHB right now. Next slide, please. This is the long-term vision we put forward for 2050. And as mentioned, we have now 41 EHB concrete projects awarded PCI status, which means 2/3 of the PCIs are pipelines. Clearly, public support, as mentioned at this early stage, is critical, and so far, those individual member states that are at the forefront of the concrete and real projects are those whose governments are more supportive. This is the case of the Netherlands, of Germany, or Denmark, that already put forward financing solutions, but also other countries such as Spain, France, Lithuania, Norway, or Finland are carrying out development studies. Next slide, please. I would like to start with a real case. As you know, the Dutch government subsidized 50% of the 1.5 billion euros total cost to bringing its hydrogen network to operation. And this is starting clearly with an early connection between supply and demand. This project between Dow and Yara is a 12 kilometers project. This is an opportunity to learn, to get projects down in the ground. And that's how we think the future hydrogen network will start in valleys. Next slide, please. Now, this first operating pipeline is part of a broader Dutch national hydrogen backbone. There is already 32 kilometers underground pipelines under construction, and the aim is to connect those early projects into a broader backbone. Next slide. This is what other countries are doing as well. It's the case of Finland, and it's a very good example how connecting valleys will build the backbone in the future. In the case of Finland, most of the wind power projects are located in the west coast of Finland. That's why the hydrogen infrastructure will be built mainly in coastal areas. But going forward, our goal is to involve more operators in the hydrogen sector in each country in order to cover the entire countries. Next slide. What we think is that in the longer term, starting from a hydrogen cluster approach, which is not a black and white thing, is a first step to build a future pan-European network, can save a lot of money in terms of a cost. A pan-European hydrogen infrastructure will not only support the scale up of the renewable energy, but also allowing for producing hydrogen in those regions where there is cheap renewable electricity. We think can save billions of euros in savings. Next slide, please. So why we think we need a full European integrated backbone? First, as mentioned, because there are areas with high demand from industry mainly that don't always have the room for major renewables development. It is simply not possible to build all the renewables capacity, for example, in Germany, to feed its industry demand for hydrogen. Same as I just showed, Finland is as big country as Germany, but has much more space and, for example, 100 gigawatt wind onshore capacity deployment. Second reason, we will have hydrogen imported by ships, and this will need to be transported to inland locations. Likewise, we will also have imported hydrogen from by pipeline and will be needed to be transported through Europe. Fourth reason, renewable hydrogen production and demand will be variable and will require also the development of large-scale storage in different locations, and those locations are not evenly spread over Europe. That's another rationale for building cross-border pipelines. And last and not least, as already mentioned, is a cost issue. If we want this to be affordable, we need to exploit the hydrogen production potential in regions with low production renewable electricity. We all know that transporting energy in the form of molecules via pipelines is 6 to 8 times cheaper than transporting electricity. And one single pipeline can transport 17 gigawatts of hydrogen. Next slide, please. When we will need this hydrogen backbone infrastructure operating and already connected, what is clear is that by 2040, the EU ETS requires our industry and transportation and electricity production to zero, and we need to facilitate the build out of the EHP, therefore, in the 2030s. In the steel sector, for example, many primary steel producers that are planning to transition from today coal, perhaps natural gas, and then hydrogen, they will only invest in new processes if those plants can have access to a large market for hydrogen with a number of different suppliers. Therefore, this will require clearly large-scale infrastructure. One large primary steel plant requires around 1.5 BCM of hydrogen in natural gas equivalent. This is a massive volume. We, as gas transmission system operators and storage operators, are ready to support the build out of the future European hydrogen backbone. We are starting with regional and enabling hydrogen values to be connected in the course of the 2030s. But for that, we, as I already mentioned, we need to be able to manage the load risk. This is the main risk related to financing today hydrogen infrastructure, as the entire value chain of hydrogen investments are anticipatory investments of the expected future development of the hydrogen market. Next slide, please. We think that an early adoption of large-scale infrastructure will reduce the need for public support in the initial stages. And that's why we are asking for in this pre-FEED phase to have enough support for DEVEX study that will create more certainty looking forward in terms of the cost and therefore in terms of future demand. And with this, I think I'm done for my initial intervention. Thank you very much.
Excellent, Maria. Thank you very much to you. We will now move right away to our next speaker, Peter Kleis. He's the president of IFIEC, the International Federation of Industrial Energy Consumers. Peter.
Thank you very much, Ilaria. Can you hear me?
Right. Yes, we can.
Thanks for organizing this seminar, and thanks also for inviting me. I think it's well, we are facing, of course, two major challenges as far as an industrial consumer is concerned. The first is how can we find the best roads towards decarbonization or climate neutrality for our economy. We have three possibilities there. You go with renewables and then with storage or conversion to molecules. You go for CCS, CCU, and or you go for nuclear. That are essentially the three things that we can do today, the technology types that we have. We think that what we need is a mix of those three, and hydrogen will definitely play a role also for some industrial processes to help them decarbonize. But today it's not clear whether hydrogen will be the sole solution for the whole decarbonization process. And then on top of that, we have as an industry, of course, an additional challenge that is to have access to competitive energy throughout the whole process, because, well, realizing climate neutrality without an industrial activity left in Europe, I don't think that's an option we have to take. So we have to find a balance between these two things. In hydrogen, it's a bit a discussion of chicken and egg. We do need a well-functioning market, market rules and availability of hydrogen to have a system, a hydrogen system going, and to do that you need the grid, but you don't need the grid if you don't have a market. So I think it's a matter of in a balanced way going forward, leaving all options open. Also, for instance, blue hydrogen or other types of hydrogen that can be used in order to make availability of hydrogen acceptable for everybody. So it's quite a long way, and the essential thing is that we develop the whole chain of a hydrogen system, not only grids, but we also have to find solutions for availability. We have to find solutions for the cost of a system partly based on hydrogen. We have to make available infrastructure besides grids, also storage, also imports of hydrogen from inside Europe, but also from outside Europe. So it's a huge challenge where we will continue to look at the affordability for citizens, and of course, in our view, the competitiveness of energy supply for industry, and we will follow that whole process from that perspective too. So let's see how it evolves, and I look at regulators and very intelligent people who know about grid financing, what they come up with, and we will definitely help and contribute to that process from a perspective of industrial consumers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to you, Peter, indeed. And the perspective of consumers is always key, I think, when we discuss about the upcoming scenarios. So let's move now to our third speaker, Abel David Enriquez Rodriguez. He's part of the moderating team in the ENNO Foundation process, or pre-ENNO, as it is called, I understand. Abel, please.
Thank you, Laria, and a very good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the invitation to participate in this very interesting online debate. Indeed, we are still with a discussion whether we are pre-ENNO, ENNO. So I think we still have a long work to do ahead of us. But I don't want to consume a lot of time with the introduction. I guess let's move to the slides. So indeed, as you all probably know, we have already with us the hydrogen and gas, the decarbonized gas market package. This package brings the obligation for the future HTNOs to set up an association, ENNO, European Network of Operators for Hydrogen. And the future HTNOs are currently on the process to set up this entity. We started that process on the last January, on the 23rd of January. We had already some interventions in the Energy Infrastructure Forum. On the 18th of June, we published that we had reached a political agreement between the future HTNOs, and then on the content of the statutes. And on the 30th of August, we submitted, according to the regulation, our proposal of draft statutory documents to ACER and to the European Commission. Now is the time for ACER to assess, to evaluate our proposal. They will probably launch a public consultation, and then in 4 months, before the end of this year, we are waiting for their opinion on these statutory documents. After this process, the Commission will enter into the game, also with preparing their own opinion. And after this opinion from the European Commission, we expect to start working already towards the foundation, official foundation of ENNO before the end of June. And after this foundation, the publication in the Monitor Belge, I mean the official journal of Belgium, could take place around October. And it's from there when ENNO will officially and legally start to exist. So a long way to go, but still we are in the process to prepare for that. And we are in the process because we want to set up kind of pre-ENNO, ahead of ENNO, since we have already some tasks and deliverable according to the regulation which are foreseen for next year, for 2025 and for 2026. We have also received some mandates to work on different topics from the Energy Infrastructure Forum, and we want to be well prepared for all that by to ensure that when ENNO is there in October 2025, these deliverables are well advanced, and we are able to deliver according to the expectations in the regulation. So yeah, probably in a few weeks, months, you will listen more from us and from this pre-ENNO that could come and could set up soon. If we move then to the next slide, please. Yes, so in the current situation, it's difficult for me to set up or to explain a strong position on the topic that is coming today to us in this online debate. What I did is just to collect elements from the package, from the directive and from the regulation, where ENNO is to be established to ensure an optimal management of the Union Hydrogen Network. So for us, there is no discussion that this Union Hydrogen Network is going to be developed. And we in ENNO will work to allow a trading and supply of hydrogen across borders in the Union. These hydrogen networks brings different benefits. Already have some of them have already been mentioned by previous speakers. So they constitute an important means of efficient, sustainable transport for hydrogen. Transporting hydrogen is an effective and efficient way of transporting energy, both onshore and offshore. With hydrogen, we can advance energy system integration, and that's an important part of the future also a legislative term, how to ensure this integrated energy system. Then we will use, of course, the repurposing of existing gas infrastructure for the future network. In some regions, the percentage will be higher. In other regions, will be lower. But I think that more or less everywhere there will be repurposing. And then the future hydrogen network will interconnect markets, will ensure market integration, will facilitate the integration of growing volumes of hydrogen, will transport hydrogen from across the borders from low cost production areas to highly consuming areas. We already saw this in different maps before, and will enable the trading of hydrogen from third countries. Hydrogen clusters or valleys are an important block of the Union's hydrogen economy, but they are not the only block. And personally, I see here that the development of an EU-wide hydrogen network from the beginning is fully compatible with prioritizing the connection of the main hydrogen valleys. Both things can be done from the beginning, valleys, hydrogen network. The routes proposed for the main hydrogen corridors reconcile both visions, allowing properly dimensioned networks for the long term. So by connecting the hydrogen valleys to the national hydrogen network system, valleys will have access to higher flexibility. So they will be able to cope much better with fluctuation production when they have a surplus of production or when they have a deficit of production. By connecting to the backbone, they will have access to this stable supply. Security of supply is another advantage of being connected, diversification of supply, competition on the supply side. So there are a number of benefits which we see will bring the valleys to connect to the backbone, to the national systems and the cross-border systems to benefit from all this. Additionally, by building these national and trans-European networks, of course, we identify today certain demand to do so. But when we have the infrastructure already in place, additional demand on top of the already identified demand will emerge by natural evolution. And all this brings a cycle of development, helping to underpin the future development of the future hydrogen network in Europe. So with all this, I thank you again for the invitation. As I said, we are still in the founding process. Still, it's difficult for ENO to have a strong position in many elements. We need still to set up our own structures. But sooner or later, you will start to listen more and more from us. And we are willing to cooperate with FSR and with the other stakeholders. Thank you very much.
Many thanks to you, Abel. Indeed, it's work in progress, but I think you raised already some very interesting points for the debate. So thanks a lot for that. And we are now moving towards our final speaker, last but not least, as usual, Ralf Backe. He is the CEO of the German Gas TSO ONTRAS and board member of Gas Infrastructure Europe. Ralf, welcome.
Yes. Thanks, Alaria, and thanks for the invitation and good afternoon for the audience. Yeah, my general remarks around the question which hydrogen network for Europe will be very short. I'm absolutely convinced that the large-scale use of hydrogen is essential for the energy transition in Europe. Only hydrogen can currently provide the cost-efficient storage of large amounts of energy that are necessary for energy system that is largely fed by volatile renewable energy generation. And there's no alternative, especially for large-scale industries such as chemical, cement, or steel, which currently still emit a major amount of CO2. However, significant quantities of hydrogen also raise the question of security of supplies, availability, and affordability. And the issue of security of supply and affordability is heavily dependent on the availability to utilize many hydrogen production potentials. And competition and those corresponding price for hydrogen will only materialize with as many production options as possible. And this can only be realized with a well-developed cross-border transport throughout Europe and beyond. The analysis showed that the most cost-efficient solution for such a transport is the implementation of a European hydrogen backbone. And a well-developed infrastructure, including, that's important, from storage facilities and terminals, acts as a clear accelerator for the ramp-up of such a hydrogen market. The question then naturally raised as to how the initial high investment in such an infrastructure can be covered by the as yet not existed market participants. As you know, the German TSOs published in the last month the so-called core grid for the German area. And we developed a grid that will be 10,000 kilometers long, approximately. We generate this with over 6% of repurposed pipelines, and the most of them will go in operation up to 2032. I think that's a huge task. It's a huge investment. And for us as TSO, it was very crucial to solve the chicken egg problem that we already described today. That means that we will have in the first stage a huge investment and a need of capital. And on the other side, we have not enough customers. They are willing to pay this. And for this we create a financing model that's like state-owned, state-supported. This interim financing was put in place, and I think it's a very innovative model. And such or similar financing model that also includes cross-border issues are needed, quite clear, to create the right investment condition for such an infrastructure. And finally, from my side, when we are planning such an European hydrogen backbone, it's quite necessary to closely coordinate the upcoming planning steps with those for natural gas and electricity and hydrogen together. That's my short introduction word for today.
Short and effective. Thanks, Ralph. Alberto, you have raised your hand. Is this voluntary or?
No,
Okay.
I think it's something happening.
Okay, no problem. No problem.
I have to
Okay,
lower it
wonderful.
now.
So we have, I think, exhausted our first round of comments from our panelists. So we would like now to actually listen to our participants' opinion. And for that, we have prepared some polls, some questions, and all participants are invited to vote. Our speakers will not have this possibility. It's only for participants, but of course, then we will be delighted to hear their comments on the results of the polls. I give the floor now to Alberto for running the polls.
Yep. Thank you very much, Ilaria. And the first two questions are about the role of hydrogen in over two different horizons. The first one is 2030, and here we're asking what would be, in your view, the role of hydrogen. First option is there won't be sufficient volume significant to substitute fossil fuel-based hydrogen currently used as a feedstock, or you think that there will be sufficient hydrogen to substitute most of the current fossil-based hydrogen used as feedstock. The third one, hydrogen will also start to substitute other fossil-based energy carriers beyond hydrogen, gray hydrogen in hard-to-abate sectors and processes, or the fourth, you might not have a view for the time being. So in increasing order of penetration of renewable and low-carbon hydrogen. So please vote. Okay, so a quite prudent reply from our audience. Most of them think that by 2030 there won't be the substitution, not even of gray hydrogen in current hydrogen using processes and sectors. Okay, thank you very much. And now we move to the next question, which is actually looking at 2040, and therefore here, you know, the possible answer are somewhat different, because by then, you know, the first option is it will have by then renewable or low carbon hydrogen will have substituted most fossil-based hydrogen currently used as a feedstock. Another alternative is it will also substitute other fossil-based energy carriers in hard-to-abate processes, which have by then will not have been electrified, or it will be playing a major role in substituting substantial volume of other carriers in hard-to-abate processes. So just substituting hydrogen, substituting some of the other carriers having a major role and substituting most or significantly the other carriers by 2040. Okay, so here I think we have interesting results, because I think a quite distinct majority think that it will have completed the substitution of gray hydrogen, let's say, and then have also started to go into substituting other carriers in hard to abate sectors, which is well, I think is what the majority view is, at least for the time being. So this is obviously has implications for the network that is necessary. And the third question is about imports of hydrogen. What would be the role, in your view, of imported renewable hydrogen by, I would say, 2035, just to go somewhere in between 2030 and 2040, but let's say along that decade. So do you think that imports of renewable hydrogen will only play a marginal role? Do you think that renewable hydrogen-based energy carriers like ammonia will play a significant role by then? Or renewable hydrogen as such would play a significant role in imports, or imports of renewable hydrogen as such would play a significant role? Or do you think that both hydrogen as such and hydrogen-based energy carrier will play an important role? So the import of both hydrogen and hydrogen-based energy carriers would play an important role by 2035, let's say. And there's always an opportunity to. Oh, that's interesting, because I think there is a quite spread opinions, either a marginal role. For sure, if it seems that for sure, if it is imported, it will be imported in forms different from pure hydrogen, probably as ammonia. But I can see quite different views emerging from our audience. Thank you very much. And the final one is going back to the focus of this workshop, and it's about what are, in your view, the implication of the scenarios emerging from the answers to the previous question for the hydrogen network infrastructure by 2035, 2040. So again, mid to end of the next decade. It will still be confined to local compounds as present, so energy hydrogen valleys, mostly confined to local compounds, but with a few long-distance pipelines, or a few well-integrated regional network, a well-integrated EU-wide network. So. And you also have the. Okay, that's interesting. So the large majority, I would say, we have two visions emerging here, and they're all sort of somewhere in between the two extremes. So we have mostly confined to local compounds, but with a few long-distance pipelines, and the other one, a few well-integrated regional networks. I think there is a minority that think that by 2040, there will be a European-wide integrated hydrogen network. And actually interesting, I didn't check the previous one, but I think everybody had a view so far. We didn't have a lot of attendees who did not express a view. So, Ilaria, I think we may want now to go around again, our panelists and speakers, to ask them, for a short reaction to the results. Back to you.
Looking forward to it. I think these results were very interesting. So I would go in reverse order and start from Ralph this time.
Thanks, Ilaria. Yeah, some of the answers not surprised me, and I'm completely with them. The other ones, yes, of course, there is a clear majority, and I say that they are the meaning that the most of the power that we need in the future will come from the electricity side. But that will be not the right thing, because it will be not function, especially for the large industry like chemical, the cements and also the steel industry. They have no options to jump to a real energy system in this case. And therefore, if we step this way, then we put it out from Europe. That is quite clear. And the other ones is, of course, we have these volatile generated renewable energies, and we could try to fit this together with the demand side. They're also volatile. Maybe in the same direction, that would be the good case, but I'm not expected that will be fits to 100%, and therefore we need storages for this. And the cost-efficient way to do this, that is to store this about the hydrogen area.
Okay, excellent. So, Abel, so Ralph is saying that there will be, by all means, some centers, some industrial clusters consuming hydrogen, but what about the infrastructure then connecting these centers? Do you agree with the views of the majority?
So, yeah, it's difficult for me now to predict or to say something on this, but I mean, at this moment, I understand that there might be there are uncertainties among the market players, among the stakeholders. I understand that some people, I mean, that the audience is divided in some answers, and these uncertainties will be slowly being removed, I would say, in the short term, when we will see already investments and FIDs starting to happen, when we see the new planning, also the role of ENO will be important there. So I would say that, yeah, there are industries which will need decarbonized energy. Hydrogen is one of the options there. And for this energy to be accessible for them, infrastructure has to be there too. And it's a prerequisite. And this the infrastructure will facilitate this access to energy. So yeah, it's a moment of maybe different views, but the movement is already, I mean, the ball is already rolling. The industry is getting prepared, and sooner or later we will see more lights on all these things. Yeah.
Thanks, Abel. Peter, do you want to make a sort of prediction based on this polls and the results that we obtained?
You know, as an economist, I know it is very difficult to make predictions, especially about the future. But yeah, well, I'm not surprised by the answers, and this is also the feeling I think that industrial consumers overall have. A bit surprised that there's no question about 2050. Because in the end, yeah, well, that's the end horizon, and well, it's even more difficult to make forecasts about the very long term. But what we think will be the final energy system, or the decarbonized or climate neutral energy system in 2050, of course, the steps we have to make towards that will have to be in line with what the final system will be. On the other hand, I'm also happy that you always mention not only renewable hydrogen, but climate neutral hydrogen as a rule. I think we also have to look at the possibilities with specifically with blue hydrogen, but maybe also other colors. I'm not going to enumerate them all, but so that is good that once the hydrogen molecule is produced, it has no color anymore. It's for industrial use, it's the same. So that's interesting to do that. For hard to abate sectors, well, as the word says, they are hard to find solutions. An alternative for hydrogen, for climate neutral hydrogen, would be CCS CCU. So there is one, but we have to again look at all possibilities. And my conclusion of these polls is that let's go step by step. Let's really try if we can develop a whole chain of a hydrogen economy, not only infrastructure, not only storage. We have to make sure that we can set up infrastructure storage infrastructure, that we can make possibilities happen for imports from overseas, that we have generation facilities if we want to use hydrogen really as as an energy carrier for electricity production, well, then you will need new technology there too. We have to develop the whole chain and then see if it's competitive compared to other solutions. So a lot of work to do. Thank you.
Many thanks to you, Peter. And Maria, yes, we've seen quite some answers also on the existence of an EU-wide network. Perhaps the speed is not the same that we all might think it can have, or what is your interpretation of the results in the poll?
Okay, well, I understand as well the uncertainty currently, but as Peter said, we are, as economists, what we are doing here is not forecasting. What we do at EHP is a backcasting exercise. Where do we want to be? What are our policy objectives? And that's what is needed. So definitely it will depend on a political decision of our society. That's my first point. Want to reach the net zero industry goal by 2040, we need to deploy large-scale infrastructure. My second point is that clearly there will be a delay. We know that, but that will not fundamentally change the end picture. I mean, of course, 6 years' time to reach the 2030 target is very short for deployment of infrastructure, but as I mentioned, and other speakers mentioned, we are making progress, and provided there is policy support, I think what we are proposing is feasible. Third point, on the electrification of industrial processes, we don't know what the technology will provide us with in terms of innovative developments. What we do know is that the electricity grid expansion is currently running to its limits today. And this is another solution. And my fourth point is about imports. I think that for reasons of security of supply, we need to enable the rollout of renewable production and green hydrogen production in Europe. But I mean, there will be for sure also a world market that will develop. We will import molecules via pipelines from neighboring countries such as Norway, Ukraine. This is a fundamental piece of the recovery program for Ukraine. And there will be imports of ammonia by ships. There are now, and there's no reason to believe there won't be in the future. So I think that if we want to have our large and strategic in this industry, such as primary steel production in Europe, we will need to do something. But as I mentioned, this is not a forecasting exercise. This is a voluntary initiative of Europe.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Maria. So I would now give the floor back to Alberto to see whether he would like to ask for more opinions or change topic, because we also had a couple of questions through the chat and Q&As.
I would pose these two questions, and then one which actually was already answered and therefore disappeared, but I think it's worth returning to it. And here I would then go to Cilla and Lucas, because they are mostly regulatory and policy, but then also, to the extent that we have some time, I would ask the other panelists. The first one is something that was, in the question and answer, but it's an interesting one, is whether we should directly apply the single system paradigm to hydrogen. Gas, when the regulation for gas was introduced, as it was already said, we had a gas sector, we had a national gas market, etc. Now we are starting anew, and therefore whether the so-called single system paradigm, so the idea that it's, the European network is regulated as a single system, could be applied to gas. And I know that, the Commission has looked into it, and the decarbonized package, the gas package, is actually has provision on it. But if this is the vision even going forward, and the other one is, what is the level of commitment that we can expect from network users before we start developing and take final decisions on the specific project. So I would start by Cilla, then Lukáš, and then to the extent that we have time, perhaps the other panelists can briefly give their views. So single system paradigm and commitment of hydrogen network users. Cilla.
Yes, sorry, I'm just coming up. Very interesting questions. I think single system would be something, paradigm is an important concept. And I think there are steps that we are undertaking to create it. I think a lot more needs to be done. And then the question starts with scenario building and understanding what are going into these scenarios. And the improvement that has happened in this context is that we have a lot more user input into the scenario building. The question is whether that is sufficient, and then still there are questions whether those are realistic enough. These are difficult elements. So I think we have all sorts of discussions. My infrastructure colleagues are working on this, and then it's a little bit sort of. I mean, I think the complaints are still present around the ENTSOs, whether they do the utmost effort to build this aspect up. Here, one of the elements are that there is competition between the vectors, and also for the future hydrogen vector, there will be competition with other energy sources, as it is today, right? You know, you could use different vectors for different kinds of production, factories, sectors. And so somehow you have to find a way how you optimize it. And that can be dependent not only on the sector, but also in certain certain geographies, realities, you know, how you can transport certain elements. And then you would opt, for example, for a second best than the first best, simply because the location where you are is as such. So that is complex, and then the current energy system has been optimized over a long period of time, right? And then all of a sudden, then you try to sort of create something new in the future. You have some projections, but that does not mean that you are there at the point in time where you could optimize. And that really sort of connects to the point that Peter was making earlier, you know, like projections are just projection from an economic perspective. And then, of course, reality will be rather different, or often is rather different. Then the commitments. So on the commitment side is that's also something that we are talking about the nascent industry. And then the question is, you know, like how you create commitment on the demand side so that, you know, then this utilization will happen. And I think there will be also some needs for the sectors to identify, you know, how they would like to decarbonize themselves. And again, that goes back to the point what Peter was saying at the very, very beginning in his introduction, that if you're looking at, you know, to the affordable options today in terms of decarbonizing the industry, while there you don't really have hydrogen yet on the list because that is not competitive. So the question is, you know, like what you do in addition to these commitments. Do you do some risk management? Do you like what is the equation that the user side would need to respond to?
Thank you, Cilla. Lukáš, do you have views on this single system, considering the whole of Europe as a single sort of jurisdiction, and therefore taken as that, and on this commitment question?
Yeah, I mean, maybe just two complementary points. I think Cilla already made very, very relevant ones. Firstly, as you hinted at, Alberto, the possibilities there. The package allows that member states decide together that they have a similar approach to what is already being used, for example, in natural gas in the Baltics, between the Baltics and Finland. We did not impose it. So I think the question is really what preferences and what needs will emerge in different regions or subsectors of our hydrogen system. When it comes to the commitments, I think maybe two reflections. I think that's really a regulatory or national question also to when really deciding on or business decision on when deciding on if things should go forward. I think from our perspective, when we look at the hydrogen bank, when we look at projects of common interest, we really try to make sure that these projects are real and that there is commitment behind it. And that's something that we are checking very carefully, and we will continue to check. And maybe just as a suggestion, when we talk about commitments from the sector, and Gilad hinted at what actually really works for hard to abate sectors, my impression is really that this shifts very fast. And I mean, listening to energy intensive industries, for example, they don't say the same what they said a year ago or 6 months ago. And I would really encourage us not to talk about these sectors that will actually be the ones deciding, but to loop them into such conversations, because we casually tend to say cement, high temperature, and so on. But if you really talk to them, it's actually very, very limited elements sometimes that can really be decarbonized with hydrogen. So I would simply encourage us to loop them into future discussions on this topic.
Thank you very much, Lucas. We still have a couple of minutes, so I wonder whether the panelists would like to have a sort of 30 seconds reaction on this. And I will now go in the initial order. So Maria, 30 seconds on these two issues, but really please stay within 30 seconds.
I think that a single jurisdiction model makes sense if we believe in a cross-border pan-European integrated network. Start from scratch gives the privilege of making everything compatible and reaping all those benefits for the longer term. In this regard, if properly done this way, I think that the risk is not of overbuild, but the opposite, that we do not build in time enough cross-border corridors to meet our goals. And in terms of the level of commitments of network users, it will depend on the cost. And our point is that if we want to make this as cheaper as possible, let's make it big, large scale from the very beginning. Is what is more efficient in terms of cost.
Thank you, Maria. We need to leave it there. Peter.
Thank you. Very briefly, very much in agreement with what Sia and Lucas said, so nothing additional there. What you need, and look at existing experiences with hydrogen grids. There already exist some hydrogen grids throughout Europe. Do you have a stable and a high enough volume, both on supply side and demand side? Do you have long-term needs because you don't build a pipeline for 2 years? And 3, what is the cost, and is it less expensive than alternatives? That are the key elements for the development of the grid. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Peter. So Abel.
Yes, I would say, yeah, not so much to add, but basically the infrastructure needs long-term commitments. And these commitments can come from the regulators, from the users, but without them, it's going to be difficult to build infrastructure. The infrastructure will be needed, and will bring a benefits for the market and for the future evolution of our economy. But yeah.
Very much. Ralph, the last 30 seconds.
Thanks. Yeah, for me, it's a question of time. If we will have enough time, then we could wait and for the development of the hydrogen market. But this isn't the case, and therefore we need accelerates to push to ramp up this market. And one of these accelerates could be to deliver a good styled and with a good forecast styled infrastructure. I think that create a big safety for investments, also for the demand side. That's my remark.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot, Ilaria.
Well, just as a final consideration, I believe that, as we said at the beginning, we are still quite far from having a clear picture and clear steps towards the development of a hydrogen network for Europe, but the interest is still extremely high, as also the number of participants in today's debate demonstrates. I think everybody agrees that the situation will evolve, so we will not, in a couple of decades, we will have moved forward compared to today's situation and the hydrogen valleys. This is seems to be, at least according to the polls results, something like a common understanding, but many question marks still remain, and in particular, I understand concerning the internal connections between the imports and the places of consumption. But overall, very interesting. We will be there to follow closely the development for sure.
Thank you, Ilaria. Then for me, I agree with that. It was very interesting discussion. I think there is still some uncertainty. It's not only of not as much as where we want to go, but how we will get there and the timing. So I would like to thank Lucas, Cilla, Maria, Peter, Abel, and Ralph for joining us. I would like to thank Tomiris, in the background. She's always instrumental in making these events happen, and without her, nothing would happen of this kind. And just for those who are donors of the FSR, we are going to continue to look into this, and most likely in the new year, there will be a day-long workshop in which we will try to see if we can come up with something like a target model for hydrogen, so that at least we know where we want to get in 2050, and then by backward induction where we want to be in 2040 and 2030. But thank you very much for joining us today. Thanks to Ilaria for working together in putting this debate on, and for hosting us. And we look forward to seeing you again soon in one of our events. So thanks a lot.
Thank you, Alberto, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks a lot.